You guys have been asking me to make a video about what's been happening to rares ever since my last video about them. To me, it's a bit of an annoying spot to get put in as I'm looking to maximize the profits I can make on all of these price movements, just like you. This means that I have an agenda in keeping my competition as uninformed as possible, and making this video would do the exact opposite. So thanks for watching, I'll see you all again next week for another video. Hey guys, it's Divine from Merge.com. I feel like I can still make this video at this point as people are going to wait for the update announcements in the Summer Summit event next week anyways. As I mentioned though, I have an agenda in keeping you as uninformed as possible, so knowing this, can you trust anything I'll tell you? I'd argue yes, since I always try to be as objective as possible. So I'll tell you about part of my point of view on what's been happening to rares since my last video about them on the 3rd of April. Which received some of the best feedback I've ever had on a video, which was nice to read. I'm sure I'll get some people tell me it's easy to speak in hindsight, but so be it. I don't think many of you are expecting me to turn this channel into a prediction on what's about to happen kind of place. You just want to understand what has happened so you can make better decisions in the future, and that's what I'll focus on. So let's get on with it. We saw some really spectacular action in Holly Wreaths, Black Santas and Half Wines at the start of April, and this caused some problems for them. Holly Wreaths were somewhat tied to Black Santas at that point and weren't really going to rise much without those doing the same. Now the issue with that was that Black Santas and Half Wine were getting too close to max cash. They moved out of range for part of the rare merchants, but more importantly, they were no longer as interesting to invest in. They had an artificial roof around max cash as merchants would be unwilling to street rate these items at this stage. So even if someone would stock a lot of Black Santas or wines around 1.7 or 1.8 bill, they would only make 20% profit in the very best case, while a lot of lower rares really didn't do much yet and thus had some interesting potential. There was also a much bigger market for lower rares as a lot more players could get involved in them. So step 1 was to show all of these players how much a few rares like Black Santa and this could rise in just a short time, followed by step 2 gradually stocking a lot of lower rares to profit on those. And so it happened. Over the next 2 weeks, lower rares began to rise gradually at first, and then a lot, up to the point where people began to buy out all kinds of rares but also junk items like tokens and Mexican rares. During the first peak, they simply rose too fast, commonly referred to as an item being overbought. So in the third step, a bunch of people dumped here and there so they could rebuy cheaper and continue to rise in the fourth step. Now this is where things started to get really interesting, as a lot of inexperienced merchants became convinced at this point that rares were going to continue to rise with only minor setbacks here and there, so the massive players jumped on them and continued to drive their prices up to unprecedented heights. Now they did exactly what the rare hoarders wanted them to do. If you have a large stock of an item and want to sell it off, the best way to do so is by convincing people, by making them believe that the new price the item is at is the norm, and that's exactly what happened here, as I already predicted in my last video. As the items reached their highest peak yet and crashed back down, a lot of people began to rebuy a few dozen million lower, as that seemed like a really attractive buy price at that point, not realizing that they were buying stock from hoarders that were making great use of these gullible players that were convinced the rise would pick back up in no time. I even literally brought up this discussion in Clan Quark at some point. I asked people, do you think these hoarders want you to believe the items will go down so that you sell them your stock cheaper? Or do you think that they want you to believe the items will continue to rise so they can sell off? Now the problem was that at this point the hoarders were no longer holding a large stable base of rares, and a lot more of them were in the hands of players trying to make some quick profit. The rares were spread out and everyone was kind of holding theirs for a few days, hoping that some random hoarders would buy those up next and make them a lot of easy profit. The issue here was that people simply got lazy and thought they were clever in rebuying cheap, but they all bought different items and nobody was really going to push those up for them. You might have had player A with 50 sites and player B with 10 discs, but both of them were unwilling to sell their stock and buy the other item as they knew they would mostly help others and potentially miss out themselves. Meanwhile, the hoarders continued to offload, and after a few days it became obvious to everyone that there wasn't going to be another rise right now. So they began to sell as things started to feel uncomfortable with such a long rising streak that suddenly came to a halt. They had simply been made to believe that rares would have this continuous cycle. Now, if you've paid any attention to merchanting since you started, you'll notice that almost any predictable pattern gets screwed up, as even a 7-year-old would be able to tell you what will happen next. Just think of how people used to invest for bonus XP weekends, maybe 1 month in advance, and it became 2 months, then 3 months, and then people just started doing it all the time, as it simply became so predictable when others would start stocking that everyone would do it. Now, once merchanting becomes really predictable for the average Joe, you should just expect things to get messy, like with the Saradomin Godsword. If you look at the graph, it's just a huge mess because it's constantly people thinking, oh, this is what's going to happen, and then someone else buys sooner to kind of anticipate that. Now, to add some fuel to the fire, Jagex announced the Summer Summit event on which they would reveal an unannounced update for August, and of course people began to speculate like crazy. Now, this led to a lot more players selling off out of fear it may be something significant, and a lot of people were talking others into doing that. Now, what's really happening here is what I like to call a collective agreement of merchants. We basically agreed that the uncertainty of an update coming up is a great reason to sell, so we can rebuy cheaper if we need to. Even if there isn't necessarily a good reason to sell, we think other people will, so we do it too. It's basically a game of merchants versus merchants where the best ones win. Another example of an agreement like this was when the level 90 shields came out and we bought them up to like 1 bill each. We knew they really weren't going to be worth anywhere near that. But for merchants, it's a great way to try to take a lot of money from each other and to have a lot of fun, of course. Now, right now, people are kind of waiting on more news about the announcement. Jagex has edited the post in the meantime, which no longer mentions a previously unannounced update for August, but only updates we already knew about. It could be oversight on their behalf, as we already did know these updates, and maybe the JMod writing it didn't know that, or it could be intentional to keep it even more secret. I've seen people speculate in all kinds of stupid ways about it, like saying it's the announcement of Jagex being bought by a Chinese company. Really, guys, that's not a content update. There's also been a lot of people saying it would be a gold sync and whatnot, but there's literally nothing to back that up, and it only makes you look kind of stupid. And overall, this rise really showed the worst in a lot of people in my eyes. It made everyone very hungry for profit and lose sense of value, like Dicing did a long time ago. I know it's just a game, but it's been appalling to see how some people begin to manipulate others to try to get them to buy or sell in their favor. If you want some advice, keep your integrity and don't become one of those people. Let your money and profits do the talking, and if you screw up, don't try to get others to save your ass, man up and deal with it yourself. As for what I think the announcement will be, Jagex has historically disappointed more often when it comes to big reveals. It would take a big game changer and a lot more valuable items to stop excess wealth from flowing to rares, and the chances of that being this announcement are realistically quite low, but of course people hate being wrong and would rather wait and see. I also think a lot of people simply want Jagex to take some kind of action to keep merchanting more exciting. Either way, the best part to me is that all of this drama has made almost everyone overlook some incredibly straightforward and very profitable investments. Thanks, guys. As for what you should do with rares next, figure it out. Good luck. I hope the video cleared some stuff up for you. If you have any questions, I may answer them in the comments below. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all again next week for the June BTS and Summer Summit video.